ChatGPT 4 is out and it's going to change everything. It seems like everybody's been talking about it these days.
It seems like we've just arrived at the beginning of the AI age.
Artificial intelligence systems are all over the internet these days.
Even South Park made an episode about it.
ChatGPT, dude.
So I figured it's as good a time as ever to talk about it, address some of the things people are saying about it, and where I see it going. We're at the precipice, ladies and gentlemen. What I truly believe is a turning point. Steve Jobs once said something like, technology does not advance at a rapid pace. Rapid breakthroughs lead to innovation far greater than anything we have ever seen before or could ever know possible. Now, I couldn't actually find this quote, and I'm not actually sure it was Steve Jobs, so here's a poorly photoshopped picture that proves that it was him. But the point is, I think it's a generally well-accepted fact of the way science has progressed, aided by the fact that it's easier to learn a few key dates in school than to focus on the years of iteration and improvement, but ultimately I believe it's accurate. Electricity wasn't a steady, slow improvement made to existing machines and systems. No, Benjamin Franklin ran outside one day with a kite and a key, got struck by lightning, and invented electricity.
Benny's got kite and key!
The internet wasn't something we'd been working on for decades that eventually became incorporated in our lives. It too was an even more rapid shift. And at the risk of getting instantly lumped into the AI hype train fanboys, I believe large language models are one of those advances, specifically generalized pre-trained transformers, GPTs. But before I try to convince you of this, I'd like to address some of the ChatGPT naysayers. By far the most common criticism I've heard of ChatGPT and generalized pre-trained transformers in general is that they can't create anything new. They're merely imitating what they see. It's really just fancy autocomplete.
Remember, so-called generative AI like ChatGPT and DALL-E should actually be called imitative AI.
AI still can't do anything new. When you give it a set of texts to learn from, AI inherently cannot generate new ideas or concepts.
So let's talk about that for a moment. Let's assume they're correct. AI can't generate anything new. All it can do is take a training set of data and turn that into another data set that looks similar. Isn't that what most people are doing already, though? Let's think about this for a second. How many stories are written every year that are completely unique? No one has seen anything like it before. All of the characters, totally original. Nothing like them in any other media. The narrative structure, the plot, the ending, all just completely unique and original. I'd wager to say almost zero. But let's look at the domestic box office for 2022. Surely that's filled with original ideas. I mean, as humans, we love originality. It's the most important thing to us, right? All right, let's see the top 10 films. Oh no, it's a sequel. You get the point. The idea that you're not creating anything new because you're just taking things you've already seen before and combining them into something new, that is what art is. Everything we do is based on what we've seen before and what we've experienced in our lives. Now, some of these people, not all of them, but some, have what I'd call a heavy conflict of interest. Nilay Patel, senior editor at The Verge, called ChatGPT fancy autocomplete. A lot of the people who seem to have problems with ChatGPT write online articles or teach English at a university. They're scared of ChatGPT, they see it as the enemy, and let's be honest, their current way of life, it probably is. The other thing they love to do is point out all the times ChatGPT, or even worse, Bing with GPT, gives some sort of nonsense response, some sort of weird hallucination or gaslighting, like when it was convinced the year was 2022, or when it told some Microsoft staffer to divorce his wife. And it's a little bit like making a video all about plane crashes and then at the end concluding, well, this is why planes are dangerous machines, and then ignoring the fact that they're one of the safest methods of travel. And ultimately, if GPT was really hallucinating this much, constantly making shit up, if it truly was
Barely functional bullshit.
it wouldn't be very useful for 89% of students who have already used it. But that's enough of the counter arguments. Let's talk about why I'm so optimistic about GPTs and large language models. One of the things that stuck out the most to me was a paper recently published titled Reflection, an autonomous agent with dynamic memory and self-reflection. In it, they introduced a heuristic that enabled the agent to pinpoint hallucination instances, avoid repetition in action sequences, and in some environments, construct an internal memory map. All of this is basically a fancy way of saying they were able to teach ChatGPT to evaluate its own answers and learn from its own responses. It was able to teach itself, and this greatly improved the accuracy of its responses. I think it's easy to see how that's a huge step up, and maybe even more importantly, how it's going to accelerate further AI research. But one of the most surprising and exciting things I learned while researching this video was how far they've come in terms of understanding something called theory of mind. Now, there's a test in psychology known as the Sally-Ann test. For those of you whom haven't heard of it, I'll explain it really quickly here. In this test, there are two characters, Sally and Ann. Sally and Ann are in the same room in which there's a covered basket and a box. Sally takes a marble and hides it in her basket, then leaves the room. While she is away, Ann decides to be a tricky little bitch and move her marble. The researcher then asks the participant, when Sally comes back, where will she look for the marble? The majority of children under the age of 4 will respond that Sally will look in the box. Now, of course, they changed it specifically to this problem so that the AI couldn't have cheated it by simply reading about this test on Wikipedia or something. Not only can GPT-4 easily handle this, it can respond to morally gray and complex scenarios. It can give answers that accept the nuance of different scenarios and explain why people are thinking what they may be thinking. I'll give 2 examples from the research paper that went more into this. And what's really cool about this paper is that it shows not just how GPT-4 responds, but also how GPT 3.5 or ChatGPT responds. It really shows the level of improvement responding to questions that require more complex analysis. Pause the video here if you want to read the full thing, but what you can see from this is that GPT-4 has a much greater understanding of what's going on in this scenario. The theory of mind, as psychologists would call it, is greatly improved. So why is it important that GPT can handle questions like these? It's because it shows a much deeper complexity to its problem-solving capabilities. Instead of being able to write you a 500-word essay on Abraham Lincoln, it can actually respond to real-world problems. You can speak to it much more like a real person, and it can respond in accordance with the way humans actually speak and feel. That's a very important part of artificial generalized intelligence, or AGI, and comparing its response to the response of GPT 3.5 is pretty staggering. It's grown a lot. To me, it seems a little short-sighted to look at what it's capable of right now and what it isn't great at and say, well, it's not going to be useful. Some of the most groundbreaking technology we use every day was at first pretty unwieldy. I mean, the first cars looked like this. The first electronic computers looked like this. There's a quote from James Corey that goes, "History was a long series of surprises that seemed inevitable in retrospect." And we can sit here, decades later, smirking in our self-congratulatory cloud of hindsight about how inevitable it was that these technological advancements would change everything.
Thanks!
But the truly useful and difficult thing to do here is to see what's revolutionary before it changes everything. So let's talk about that for a moment. What evidence do I have that generalized pre-trained transformers, or GPTs, are actually going to be a big deal? Why should you buy a ticket on the hype train? Well, the University of Pennsylvania, along with OpenAI, did a study on this exact subject. How fortunate. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't read the whole study because it's like 30 pages. However, being the internet sleuth that I am, I did read the abstract, and there's some pretty staggering figures here. 80% of the US workforce could have at least 10% of their tasks affected by the introduction of LLMs, while approximately 19% of workers may see at least 50% of their tasks impacted. And if that wasn't bad enough, our analysis suggests that with an access to an LLM, about 15% of all worker tasks in the US could be completed significantly faster at the same level of quality. When incorporating software and tooling built on top of LLMs, this share increases to between 47 and 56% of all tasks. Looking back on this, I'm realizing that perhaps I'm portraying this data as more spooky than it needs to be, but I think that's the reaction a lot of people had to this study. There seems to be an oscillating reaction online from people who are either convinced that it's going to change everything, or it's not going to change anything. I'd like to use a little more nuance here. Clearly, if it's affecting this many jobs, and 89% of students have admitted to using it, it's going to make some changes to the world. As for the impact of those changes, well, the study explicitly says we do not make predictions about the development or adoption timeline of such LLMs. But just looking at this chart they give here, you can see there's a ridiculously high exposure in a lot of these professions to what GPTs can actually do. So grab your hats, this train's headed to speculation town. And this is where, in my opinion, there's 2 roads diverging here. 2 paths people as a whole see generalized pre-trained transformers taking. The first is the automation fear path. People see statistics like the one I just quoted you from the study and it scares them. They imagine a future where writing articles online, reviewing games, creating recipes are handled by the GPT-9 AGI god. Humans left without a purpose live in squalor, surviving solely off the charity of billionaires and a few donations from our AI overlords. Alright, maybe it's not that bad, but they tend to think that GPTs will end up costing a lot of jobs. And here's my hot take. They will. A lot of jobs that exist today won't be necessary in the future. But the thing is, this very process and these exact fears of automation have been present with us since the start of the Industrial Revolution. It used to take a factory of 200 people to produce a single automobile. Now 20 people running machines can work that same factory and produce more cars in a single day. That's because that process has been automated. So what happened to the other 180 people? Well, other jobs were created. Taxi drivers, truckers, plenty of things didn't exist before cars were commonplace. Now trucker is one of the most common jobs in the entire United States. But more importantly, and here's the dirty little secret, a lot of bullshit jobs were created to fill in the gaps left by automation. Now, I'm not saying that all office jobs don't need to exist, but a lot of them don't. There's a lot of jobs that probably didn't exist in the 1910s when it took 200 people all day to make a single car. Jobs titled Senior Solutions Supervisor or Global Brand Liaison. We, as humans, have an extraordinary ability to create jobs for people. Now, I don't have time to get into the why of this, as it's a lengthy topic for another video, but if you want to know more right now, I cannot recommend enough reading Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. So even if GPTs do end up getting rid of a lot of jobs that currently exist, new ones will be created to fill the gaps, as they historically have for hundreds of years. That leaves us with the other path. Somewhat paradoxically, I see this path as being quite possible as well. The path where AI is a guide to humans rather than an enemy. It helps us perform tasks at work more quickly and easier than we otherwise would have, and gets rid of some of the more annoying tasks that no one particularly enjoys doing. Like a coder who has to read and respond to their boss's lengthy emails about his thoughts on the most recent company meeting. We could finally have assistants that are actually assistants, not this Siri and Alexa crap. Assistants that actually can do useful things. We can live in a better world, and I think that even if you despise ChatGPT, you'd be foolish not to use it. Your peers won't be handicapping themselves in the same way, and they'll be able to perform nearly half their tasks more efficiently than you. Deep down, I think we all have a bit of an Amish tendency to be scared of new technology, and I get it, but embracing this now, while it's still nascent, is going to be a requirement in the future, so get used to it. As much as Musk and Wozniak would like it if AI would slow down, it's not going to.
Future's now, old man.
So, thanks for watching. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you liked the video. And be sure to check out my videos on pandas and advertising.